You were one of the principal negotiators with Bob Lighthizer of the deal with China. Are you confident that the Chinese can honor the commitments to buy the products from the United States that they agreed to?
I have every expectation that they will. They have continued to tell us that they will, as recently as last week when Secretary Pompeo met with one of the senior people that flew in from China, and they had a summit. So I have that expectation that they will lead up to their obligation. Now, having said that, let me just comment on, I think the world wants a lot more transparency on COVID. How did it start? How did it spread? How did it spread around the world? And it didn't spread within China. So we shouldn't confuse these two issues. Yes, we have expectations that they will live up to their trade agreements, but we also have expectations they need a lot more transparency around the disease.
There is not more transparency. Do you think there will be a decoupling with the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy? I think you have talked about that recently, but you see that as being separate than the trade agreement. But are you worried about it, or do you think it could be appropriate to have a decoupling at some point?
Well, I don't want to speculate, David. It could. I think you have a lot of companies that are beginning to look at their supply chains and making sure they diversify them. And I think that's something that's prudent to do wherever they are around the world. You have a lot of companies that are looking at bringing jobs back to the U.S. because of our tax incentives in other areas. As we have said all along, if we can compete with China on a fair and level playing field, it is a great opportunity for U.S. businesses and U.S. workers, as China has a large growing middle class, several hundred million people. But if we can't participate and compete on a fair basis, then you are going to see a decoupling going forward.
So the Chinese government is thinking about changing the ways in which it operates and oversees Hong Kong. The president has been concerned about that, so has Secretary Pompeo. If the Chinese government were to go forward with legislation it's considering, do you think the U.S. government might impose some type of sanctions to show its disapproval of what's going on?
Well, David, it's our policy. We don't comment on future sanctions, but what I will comment on is the president, and this was a few weeks ago at his Rose Garden speech, instructed me to convene what's called the President's Working Group on Capital Markets. This is myself and all the major regulators, and we're looking at all of these issues very carefully as it relates to both Hong Kong and as it relates to Chinese issuance on the U.S. exchanges.